Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. The rain has come, and while we watch to see whether it helps to quell the spread of wildfires, the lightning has caused dozens of new ones, and now warnings of possible flooding in the southeast. We'll find out what's driving that up first. And adding up the costs of back-to-school shopping. How is it hitting your family this year? Plus, after 12:30, foraging for edible and nutritious plants, you may not have to go very far. That's in our second half. I'm Michelle Eliot. Welcome to BC Today. Thank you for joining us on CBC Radio 1 and live streaming on CBC Gem, cbc.ca/BC, and on the CBC Vancouver YouTube page. Very nice to have you with us this afternoon. Well, there are still almost 420 wildfires burning across the province. In the last 24 hours, we've seen 40 new fire starts, 30 of which were lightning caused. While the rain has brought some relief, heavy winds also increased some fire activity. Meanwhile, there are warnings of heavy rain and potential flooding for the southeastern part of the province. Environment Canada says Kimberley, Creston, and Cranbrook could see up to 50 millimeters today. And for more on this, we have reached Michelle Eliot. He's a professor of hydrology at UBC's Faculty of Forestry. Good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us, Professor Eliot.
Good afternoon, Michelle. Thank you for having me.
How surprising is it to see this turn of events? We now have potential flooding after, of course, such dry, hot weather causing an unprecedented wildfire season in BC.
Well, the flood news is not surprising at all. It's quite well known that immediately after the wildfire, the flood risk increases and quite dramatically. We have been experiencing one of the worst flood season in the history of British Columbia and Canada, and the wildfire burns the upper crust of the soil. All of that organic material turns into ash, and that makes the soil not being able to infiltrate rain or snow melt. As a result, the landscape behaves as a parking lot, and the water runs over the land. The research have shown that the severity of the floods in the couple of years immediately after wildfires are actually orders of magnitude bigger than normal condition, all as a result of the hydrophobicity of the soil created by the wildfire. So we should really brace ourselves for potentially unprecedented flood season and this fall, next spring, and potentially the next couple of years until the soil regain its ability to infiltrate the rain or the runoff.
How much rain or moisture and precipitation do we need to be able to penetrate and permeate the ground to create better conditions?
Well, history and research have shown that even moderate rainfall intensity, moderate rainfall storm falling immediately after the wildfire could create a huge, large flood.
Okay.
We have experienced this in Kelowna, I think around 2003, and the previous big wildfire of Kelowna.
Yes.
And it looks like history is now repeating itself. And this again is no surprise at all.
That's really distressing to hear. Is there anything that can be done at this point?
Well, I think what we are now experiencing in recent years with the wildfire frequency and duration and spatial extent have actually been increasing. This is a wake-up call, Michelle, for policymakers to actually take a closer look at our land use and land cover and forestry policy that are now exacerbating the severity and the frequency of these floods. We have lost most of our forest cover to clear-cut logging and excessive clear-cut logging, and now wildfire on top of that. And research now have shown that the loss of the forest cover and the way we have been doing to the landscape over the last 20, 30 years changes the flood level that used to be experienced once in 100 years. We're now experiencing it once every 5 to 10 years. So therefore, we have lost one of our most natural protection agent, that is the forest cover, that we could have been using to mitigate an increase in the flood risk that is caused by climate change. I think that we should be careful not to use climate change as an scapegoat and blame all the flood calamities to just climate change. The causes of floods are multiple, right? The causes of floods are multiple, and global warming is only one of the contributing factors, but our land use and land management policies on the ground come in to actually exacerbate the situation in terms of landslides, floods, and droughts as well. And therefore, I think we in the province are in a crossroad whereby we need to really take a closer look at the policies that have been guiding our management of the land, management of the forest, and management of water resources in general, and make sure they are designed in line with the new climate realities.
Those kinds of land use decisions and policy changes could still take time. What can we do now? You talk about what we might expect this coming fall in light of the forest fire season we've seen this year. What can municipalities or towns do with their infrastructure, for example, or what can they do now to mitigate the impact of the flooding this year?
I think the one thing that comes to my mind is not to repeat the same mistake that we went through in November 2021, the flood event, whereby, by the wider public have not been alerted and warned ahead of time enough, where south of the border, they had a 48-hour head warnings ahead of time than us in BC. And the flood damage that have been caused in the November 2021 have caused a class action lawsuit against the government as a result of the delays in warning the public. And therefore, we know that the wildfire will increase the severity of the flood risk next fall, next spring, and in a couple of years. The first thing and most important thing is to make sure that the government of British Columbia alert the public ahead of time in order for the communities to take their precaution and fly to higher lands.
So it's about that communication. We've heard so much about that. What about for individuals, Professor Eliot? What can they do to prepare now? They may hope for or expect better communication, improved communication, but what can they do for themselves?
I think they need to, like they have been advised to be ready to evacuate as a result of the wildfire. They also need to be ready and keep their gears collected to be able to evacuate as soon as they are being asked to evacuate and run to higher lands.
It's a worrisome warning, to be sure, but thank you for letting us know what we need to do to prepare and your concerns around policy for the long term as well. Professor Eliot, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you very much.
Eunice Eliot is a professor of hydrology at UBC's Faculty of Forestry. We'll have much more on the weather coming up through the day here on CBC Radio 1. You can check our website as well for all the news around those flooding and rainfall warnings in the Kootenays, the southeastern part of BC. You can check our story on cbc.ca/BC and for the latest as well on the wildfires. It's cbc.ca/BC. And if your phone is running low on data, you can use our CBC Lite website. That's cbc.ca/lite, LITE. It's 1:15 now here on BC Today on CBC Radio 1 and live streaming on YouTube, on our website, and on the CBC Gem app. Where we're talking about the cost of living now. As you know, it has been a big challenge for people across BC. And just ahead of the new school year, those costs are hitting students and parents hard. Well, CBC's Liam Britton spoke to some shoppers about what items were costing them the most.
The clothes, that's one thing that they run out quite fast. They grow and also they wear them, and shoes too. And I would say this is, for a good pair of shoes, the prices are quite high.
Yeah, I feel like everything seems going up and then it's not easy. And you want to get something that works, and I don't want to go like really cheap price, but then they just broke easily, like especially for kids, right? They need to have something with like really reliable quality. But then when you look at the price, you definitely see the jump.
Well, today we're asking you, how are those back to school costs hitting your family this year? How much have school costs risen over recent years? And what financial supports would help families in need? You can give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, star or pound 690. You can email bctoday@cbc.ca. And for more on how you can manage these costs, we're joined now by Murray Baker. He's a manager of financial empowerment at Family Services of Greater Vancouver. He's also the author of The Debt-Free Graduate. Murray, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
As you work with families, what are you observing when it comes to the impact of back-to-school costs this year?
Well, families are really struggling, and the impact of inflation in terms of accommodation, housing prices, and food prices has really taken a big dent out of people's budget, and it leaves very little for these expenses associated with sending your kids back to school. So some of the big areas, of course, are clothing. Clothing can be a huge expense, especially when you have kids that are growing very quickly. That's taken a big dent. Also, when your kids are going back to school, there's other costs like sporting equipment. If they're playing a sport during the year, they're on a team. That's also a big expense for parents to take in.
Sure, and it can be a barrier, right, to students, to youth being able to participate in sports. I know those are some things that I'm calculating as well when it comes to looking at the year ahead. What are sports going to cost us? Add that to school fees, field trips, everything else, right? Band instrument rentals, things really do add up. And so for now then, how are parents trying to plan ahead?
Well, in terms of planning ahead, I think parents are being a lot more mindful of how they purchase. And certainly there's been a big shift to people purchasing used equipment, say for sporting goods, or even used supplies for school. And I think that's a great way. Not only has it become smart financially, it's very smart environmentally as well. And people are really being mindful of the throwaway. I mean, look at all the plastics and supplies that we have. And if you're just throwing those out at the end of the school year, or if your kid has graduated, some people are giving those away, which is great. So I always suggest people look at places like Marketplace online or Craigslist. Check first in the free section, because a lot of people will give these away to help benefit other kids that maybe need it.
Yeah, I know I'm part of some parent groups as well, and often you'll hear from parents specifically saying, I have this particular item we no longer have use for. Would another family like to obtain it for free? And that's a good piece of advice here. We're joined by Murray Baker, manager of financial empowerment at Family Services of Greater Vancouver, and we're asking you about back to school costs. How are you being hit by those costs this year? And what have you observed over recent years when it comes to increased costs of schooling, perhaps of sports, as we just heard as well? And if you're going into post-secondary, what are the challenges for you? We know that those expenses can really hit post-secondary students hard as well. Housing, university costs, of course, tuition, and transportation. Let us know, what are the biggest costs for you, and what are the financial programs that would help families in need? You can give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, and star or pound 690. If you want to email us, it's bctoday@cbc.ca. And Murray, I'll touch on that with you, the post-secondary costs. The early edition this morning spoke with some students about the housing challenges, and it was really causing them some distress. So what are the biggest challenges for those college and university students?
Absolutely. Housing is the big word this year when it comes to going off to college or university. There's just not enough supply, and it's forcing students to I think in many ways lower their expectations in terms of housing, or also look at taking in as multiple roommates to help make it more affordable. So the housing is the big area. Food can also take a big dent out of a student budget as well, especially when you're young. You tend to eat more than when you're older, when you're growing. So that can really take a big dent out of a student budget as well. So I always recommend that if students are shopping for food, plan out the week ahead in terms of meals, learn a few recipes from your parents before you go off, and make use of apps like Flip and Reebie that let you compare prices at all the different stores to find out who has the best prices, and then go to a store that does price matching and have them match those prices. This is not only good for food, but it's also great for parents looking for school supplies, is to compare the prices. Who has the best prices on back supplies?
You know, I tried that actually for the first time this past week, spending a little bit more time comparing costs across stores. It did cut back on my bill. A little bit more time for sure and effort, but it was worth it when it comes to comparing prices on my grocery bill. Let's take some calls now. We are asking you how back to school costs are hitting your household this year. And what are your own tips to share for others? What do you think would help families in need? What are some policies you'd like to see? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And we have a call now. Sheena is joining us on the line.
Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Sheena. Thanks so much for calling.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I used to be a classroom teacher. And, and I was the mom of she's in her 20s now, so she's not school age anymore.
Right.
And my best tip is that every school board adopt a uniform, just like they do in Scotland, where my cousins live. It cuts back on clothing costs so much. They go to the local store, which actually they sell them at the grocery store, believe it or not. And they buy 2 pairs of pants, 2 long sleeve shirts, and 2 T-shirts. And it's just a color code. It's not a super expensive, like a private school uniform. It might be green pants and a light blue shirt, or it could be, it's just a color code. And it's a great social equalizer.
Yeah.
And you don't have to argue with your kids, especially the girls, in the morning about what they're going to wear.
Well, I have a 15-year-old son who definitely cares what he wears too. But I come from the Philippines, where uniforms are very common as well, Sheena, and that might be a novel idea, right? Have you seen anywhere else in Canada that's perhaps tried it beyond those private schools?
Well, I grew up with that. I grew up in Quebec. And we all wore a, quote, uniform, in that the girls had to wear a tunic. And you just, you had a choice of a V-neck or a square neck. Yeah. And it was just dark blue. My daughter, I sent her to a French school for grade 7 and 8, and it was a uniform. It was fantastic. They could choose gray pants or kilts and white shirts.
And you found that was something that helped to keep clothing costs down, did you?
Oh, so much down, because, 12-year-old girls, they want to wear a lot of clothes, and very expensive clothes. It also has the fantastic effect of, a lot of, if a school board doesn't have a rule about what girls wear, they can wear pretty distracting clothing. And it helps with that as well. It's just great all over. It's absolutely fantastic. Also, Sheena, we should lower the number of supplies that kids bring in. So, you know what? Colored pencils are really all you need. We don't need kids bringing those Sharpie markers that, in fact, are indelible, and if you get it on another kid's clothes, it can't come off, and that saves the planet at the same time, because we don't need to be producing
That's
all that
exactly.
stuff.
Yeah, Murray was talking about that too, right? The plastics that the amount of plastics that can be involved when it comes to those supplies, and when it comes to clothing, we certainly don't want to shame anyone for what they wear to school, what they choose to wear. Sheena, thank you very much for your call. Zach is up next now as we talk about back to school costs. And Zach, are you a student or a parent yourself?
I'm a parent.
Okay, and what's been your experience?
My experience, I agree with the lady before about the uniform. It is cost saving, and it's basically gets everybody talking about something else and not shaming each other about what they're wearing and stuff. It's excellent idea. It saves money and also good for the kids to keep in line and basically avoid bullying. The other thing that I'm kind of I want to discuss is the hot lunches. The hot lunch is kind of it pushes the parents to buy, because if they don't buy the hot lunch, the kids feel left out.
Right.
And on top of everything, also they send chocolate with them, and they go door to door. So I don't know if it's that safe in terms of COVID.
Okay.
And the last thing would be part-time jobs are not common anymore. Families are struggling to raise kids. They used to have time, if they had a part-time job, they used to have time to spend at home with the kids. So that's pretty much what I have in mind.
Okay, so pardon me, about the part-time jobs, are you talking about the kids or the parents?
The parents.
Okay, so parents should be able to take part-time jobs?
Yeah, part-time jobs should be available for parents that are
I see.
struggling to raise kids. The reason I think that they're not available anymore because companies don't want to pay benefits for part-time jobbers, for part-time.
But you're talking about the benefit when it comes to being able to spend time and take kids to school and do pickup and all of that stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Spend more time with the kids and discuss struggles at home, at school, whether it's a bully issue or
Sure.
and other things, maybe with a teacher, struggling with a teacher.
Zach, can I just ask you, I do have to go back to my guest, but for yourself, what's been the biggest expense for you right now?
Pretty much clothing and school supplies plus hot lunches. It's always
All
always
of
hot
those.
lunches.
Yeah. Well, Zach, really good to hear from you as a parent. Thanks so much for the call.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank
I
you, Maggie.
appreciate your call. That's Zach in Coquitlam. Let's go back to Murray Baker with Family Services of Greater Vancouver. He's the manager of financial empowerment there, also author of The Debt-Free Graduate. What do you make of those ideas? The uniform idea, that's a novel one.
Yeah, it's a great, and a lot of schools are adopting that because it really does dissuade that polarization in terms of those who can afford the brand names and those who can't. So it really kind of levels the playing field. So I think oftentimes it's a really good idea, and does cut down on costs as well. Certainly some of the other ones that were mentioned in terms of the food. Food, as I mentioned before, is really an area that a lot of people are struggling.
Absolutely.
And looking at some of the apps, one that is interesting that I just came across recently it's called Too Good to Go, and it allows you to tap into food at different stores. They'll post it when it's getting close to expiry, but they're not going to throw it out, so it's still good food, and it alerts you where that's available. So. Certainly, some of those apps can help with the costs as well, and it can be even hot food as well.
Sure. Yeah, those hot lunches, I remember those. They can cost a pretty penny. And so, Murray, just as I wrap up with you here, is there a number or a percentage that you think would be a reasonable budget for a family for back-to-school shopping, for one child?
Well, it's really hard to say because it does matter in terms of whether they're, say, in grade 1 or 2 versus in high school. But certainly now people are looking at, depending on how much in terms of clothing, because as we've identified, takes a big dent. But I think certainly $500 is not unreasonable if you're buying clothes. But I think there's a way to really narrow that down with some of the tips that we've talked about.
Yeah.
I did mention the sports as well. one thing to look into is there are some programs that help out with families that can't afford sports, and that one is called the Jumpstart program, and it provides grants to kids that can't afford it. So it can help in terms of keeping kids in sports who may not be able to afford it otherwise.
Wonderful. That's a Jumpstart program. Thank you so much for all these tips, Murray. Always good to speak with you.
Thanks for having me.
Murray Baker is Manager of Financial Empowerment at Family Services of Greater Vancouver. And we got this email from Christina, who writes, school fees are collected each year at around $35. This is a reminder to parents that children don't need to come to school with brand new everything. All necessary school supplies are provided in class. Thanks so much, Emily. This is BC Today here on CBC Radio 1, live streaming as well on cbc.ca/BC and on the CBC Gem app and on YouTube. And coming up in our next half hour, we're going to talk about foraging. You can do it, of course, as a day trip, heading out into a forest, but you can actually also do it in your own alleys and backyards if you know how to look. We'll be joined by Métis herbalist and educator Lori Snyder to take your questions. That's coming up after this CBC News Update with Michelle Morton.
Good afternoon. Here are the headlines from the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Vancouver police say a 45-year-old man is facing charges in connection to several sexual assault cases that took place more than 14 years ago. The first took place on Canada Day in 2009 when a woman was attacked by a stranger near Granville Island. Several months later, 2 other women were assaulted. While police were able to link the attacks, they were not able to identify a suspect. Part of the province's plan to upgrade long-term care facilities, a new long-term care home has opened in South Vancouver. The Dogwood Lodge is meant to provide home-style spaces for 150 people. The $50 million project expands on an 83-bed home that was built in 1979. The project involved collaboration with Vancouver Coastal Health, First Nations, and a seniors advisory committee. And wildfire fighters are hoping a shift in weather in the province's southern interior will help in the battle against several major blazes in the region. But Environment Canada says neither Kelowna's airport nor Salmon Arm recorded measurable precipitation yesterday, although light rain did fall early this morning. The change in weather also brought stronger winds, forcing Central Okanagan emergency officials to expand evacuation alerts for parts of West Kelowna yesterday. Now a look at the local weather for today. A mix of sunny clouds, highs of 22, a chance of showers for tonight, cooling down to 14. Now back to BC Today with Michelle Eliot.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Fingers crossed, right, that rain will make a difference in the wildfires in the interior.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And some wildlife gets some drink of water as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we did get quite a bit here yesterday, late afternoon, early evening. I don't know if you observed that, if you were out.
Michelle, I had to purchase an umbrella for the first time in months.
Oh, yeah, right. Exactly. I had to dig around for mine because there it was. It really came down, and I thought, okay, I'm not going to complain. No complaints here whatsoever.
No, I know. I lost my other big one. It was my favorite. And so now I have one of those nice, those ones that, what's the word I'm looking for? They compresses, so it's small and can fit inside your bag. Compact, that's the word.
Right, yeah. Yeah, don't lose it though. That's my problem.
I will try not to.
That's
now
my
here
problem.
on the Wet Coast.
Yeah, no. Have 5 or 6 or 7 on hand. Michelle, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Michelle Morton in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Welcome back. You're with BC Today here on CBC Radio 1, live streaming as well on CBC Gem, cbc.ca/BC, and on the CBC Vancouver YouTube page. I'm Michelle Eliot. Thanks so much for joining us. Some COVID-19 news now. A highly mutated variant of COVID-19 has been detected in BC. It's the first known case in Canada. This is a case of the BA.2.86 variant. It's been confirmed in the Fraser Health region. Now, the patient has not traveled outside the province. Provincial Health Officer Dr. Bonnie Henry says they are monitoring the situation. And she spoke with the CBC's Hannah Thibodeau this morning and began by describing the variant.
We're not seeing any difference in symptoms with this strain versus, the various different types and subvariants of Omicron that we've been seeing for the last 18 months or so. There's no indication that so far that it causes more severe disease. So we'll continue to watch for that. And certainly that bears out here. The person who was infected was not hospitalized and has recovered. So, those are the things that we'll be watching globally. But it's still a very small number of people who we've detected it in so far.
How did that person feel that made them do the PCR test? Is there any indication? I think a lot of people sitting at home going, I don't know anymore.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that we need to think about with testing now. So the testing that we're doing in BC and most places across Canada, if you have a respiratory illness, so cough and fever or stuffed up and sore throat, and you're feeling sick enough that you need to get medical attention, that's when you get a test now. And the tests that we're doing look for, it's called a multiplex test, a PCR, and it looks for COVID, but also for influenza A and B, for RSV, and for another virus that causes symptoms called parainfluenza. So this person would have gone to seek medical attention, had a test done, and the test came back positive for COVID. This is how we know, one of the ways we know which viruses are circulating and causing illness at any one time. So similar to any other respiratory illness, and if you are sick enough to get medical attention, then you should get a test, and then we can follow the test. If you have mild symptoms, no matter what's causing it, you can do a rapid antigen test at home, but there's no need to go in and get a test just because you have mild symptoms. What you need to do is take care of yourself, stay away from others, and get better.
Let's talk about immunity from vaccines, because this may bypass the immunity of previous vaccines. Is that correct?
Well, we don't know that yet. Okay. So the concern is that the mutations may give it some advantage, making it easier to infect you than the vaccines that we've had in the past. But we also know that this is more closely related to one of the strains that we saw last year, the BA strains. You may remember we had the BA 4 and 5, and the vaccines are actually well matched to those. So those are the things that we'll continue to look at. What we do know, though, is that with the vaccinations that we've had, and many people having a combination of vaccines and infection, that cell-mediated, that memory immunity remains very strong. And that's what protects us against more severe illness and hospitalizations and deaths. And we may not get as good protection against getting infected in the first place. And that's why the updated vaccine that we're going to have available in the next few months should be of benefit. But it's very, very unlikely, and we're not seeing any indication of it so far, that this strain would completely bypass the immunity that we have. That's not what we're seeing. What we're seeing is that strong immunity against severe illness is being maintained for a long time, and that's a good thing. That means we're in a very different place, even as this virus is changing than we were even a year ago.
That was Provincial Health Officer Dr. Bonnie Henry. And she added that we are expecting to see a seasonal increase in the fall, and she's encouraging British Columbians to get their COVID-19 and flu boosters. And she was speaking with the CBC's Hannah Thibodeau this morning. 12:39, 1:39 now in the Mountain Time Zone. You're with BC Today. Well, yes, we here in BC, we like to spend lots of time in the outdoors. I sure do. And for more and more people, that also means foraging through BC forests for wild, edible plants. Think of those fiddleheads, mushrooms, and berries. Now, if you live in an urban area, that may mean going on a bit of a road trip, but it also might mean looking in just your own backyard. You just have to know how to look. We have a guest to share some ideas with us, and you can let us know too. Why do you like to forage in our province? What are your favorite finds, and how do you like to prepare them? And what advice do you have for beginner foragers? And what are your questions as well for our guests? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, star or pound 690 on your phone. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. Lori Snyder is a Métis herbalist and educator. She owns Earth and Company, and she holds walking tours to teach people how to find edible and medicinal plants. And she's been good enough to join us in our studio. Hello.
Hello, Michelle.
Welcome to you. I wore my forest green blazer just for you. And you're also dressed in those earth tones. Of course, we're reflecting our topic today. Why is it, do you think, that people feel so engaged when it comes to looking and foraging for those plants and flowers?
It's in our bones. It's intrinsic for us to forage, to hunt, to collect, to gather. As women, we love to shop. It's the same thing. We're just putting it back into a relationship with lands and waters.
Well, I love that, the relationship with lands and waters, because, foraging right now, it's pretty trendy, but it is actually more meaningful than a hobby. What is the meaning of it for you?
Well, for me, when I think about the word foraging, sometimes it actually kind of wakes me up in terms of there's a responsibility and there is a reciprocal relationship that actually needs to happen when we're going to take those steps to being out on the land. How do we walk on the land? How do we build that nourishes us? So am I collecting the seeds? Am I, helping to move that? Am I watering the plants?
Right.
What am I doing here? Not just me taking, but how am I being reciprocal in the relationship?
Okay, that's wonderful. For yourself, Lori, what was your own journey? How did you come to teach people?
Well, it's been a long journey. I grew up on the lands of the Squamish people. My first teacher was actually from Ireland. So as an immigrant to this land, she didn't know any of the plants. So she took it upon herself to get to know, and she introduced me as a young child. So like any relationship, it starts with the introduction. And then in my 20s, I got very curious. I was just talking with your makeup artist. She put a little makeup on me today. And I was talking about aging gracefully. So in my 20s, I wanted to learn about aromatherapy because I wanted to know how to take care of my skin and my body. That led me to herbology and to permaculture.
Okay.
So it's been this long journey in a relationship with plants, getting to know them, being curious, asking questions. And then 10 years ago, I started to teach.
Wow. What is it about teaching that you find joy in?
I think that it's seeing people light up or for them to remember. I remember this one woman saying, "Oh, I wish I wrote everything down that my grandmother had taught me." And someone else in the group said, "But the plants know." So nothing is ever lost. It's already there. And it's just really about us reclaiming our own relationship.
That relationship. Well, what are the I guess the biggest questions that you get? What are the ways that you do teach people to keep their eyes open and be able to have that relationship and seek out what is really just there very close by?
So my biggest thing that I want everybody to remember, as soon as you walk out the door, you can start that relationship.
Okay.
And also for us to recognize as a, mixed ancestry, so I have European and First Nations, it's like, what are the foods that my ancestors brought here to Turtle Island? And most likely we're going to find them right outside our door, like the dandelion, like the chickweed, like the lamb's quarter. So we can actually start that here in our urban setting versus us having to go anywhere.
Right.
And then we can think about harvesting corridors and actually bringing that back into this landscape.
And, I think dandelion, I see them, I want to blow them perhaps just for fun, but that's something that you can actually make use of?
Oh my goodness, every part of that plant you can eat. That plant is about longevity. It has all the amino acids to give us a complete protein.
Okay, see, I'm learning something now. What are those things that we do overlook? You talked about dandelion and chickweed. What are some things, perhaps if you're just in and around Vancouver, which is where you've done your tours, what can we look for?
Well, at this time of year, the rose hips are coming out. We can also go back into the relationship with dandelion and dig up the roots. If we're lucky, there's some crab apples. There's
I've seen those.
the seeds of what's referred to as frog's leaf here by the Musqueam people, which the common name is plantain, and then all plants have Latin names. So this is Plantago major. We also have a Chinese name for it. Unfortunately, I can't say that Chinese name. I couldn't remember how to pronounce it, but this is a plant that actually comes from Asia. And at this time of year, it's in its seed production.
Okay.
So those seeds are very high in protein. You could make crackers with them. You could add them to your soups and your smoothies.
wow.
And what it's going to do is to clean out your colon. So this is what I find beautiful and fascinating and so grateful for the relationship is I've been learning about plants and who's outside my door, who might be my ally, who might be my teacher or my medicine. Then I can learn more about my own ecosystem.
Your body.
My body.
Right.
How do I keep this strong and healthy? How do I live a long life? And what I've learned is people who actually eat dandelion on a regular basis, which is the new kale, you find the dandelion leaf in the
Kale, I do know,
supermarket,
yeah.
right? Is that plant is about longevity.
Okay. And, two things I want to ask you before we go to our caller. Or perhaps I'll just ask you the first thing here is food insecurity is such a big issue right now, right?
Absolutely.
We're talking about affordability in our last half hour and how much food eats up so much of our budget. How can people apply this foraging and even growing food to be able to sustain themselves through these cost challenges?
It's a really good conversation, Michelle, and something that's very much on my mind and in my heart is thinking about that. And living here in Vancouver for almost 40 years, seeing all the changes that are happening, it's like, foresting corridors, growing our own food, having that accessible at community centers, schoolyards, police stations, like wherever that extra space here at CBC around the building here, it's like we could actually add that in so that we have access. So when you're eating foods that are high nutritional value, so think about it, as soon as you walk outside and you pick that dandelion, it has not traveled from California. It's right outside your door. So you're gonna get that potassium, you're gonna get those vitamins instantly. You're going to eat less. You're going to feel better. And, for me, looking at my own genealogy, my own culture, we ate one meal a day.
Really?
For me to activate my body as I'm aging, I need to feel the cold. I need to feel the hunger. And I physically need to work, like move the body.
Okay.
So all of a sudden it's like, wow, you go from foraging, you go into this responsibility, this reciprocal relationship. And then how do I start to bring that right outside my door?
Wow. Well, let's take a call now. My guest is Lori Snyder, a Métis herbalist and educator, owner of Earth and Company. She holds walking tours in Vancouver to teach people how to find edible and medicinal plants, asking you, what are your favorite things to forage and why? What is it you love about it? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, and star or pound 690. Terry is joining us from Texada Island. Hello, Terry.
Yes, hello. I'm really happy about hearing this discussion today. I have been studying plants myself over the last 30 years, well, ever since I was very young. And I have a gentle reminder when people begin this journey of foraging is to be aware that we have, a lot of biodiversity on the West Coast, and it's a wonderful source. And my concern centers around knowing certain plants and how rare they might be or their part in, the and etc. I have an example. I live on an island, and nearby there's a large campground, very beautiful, and it has Douglas firs all around, and people love it. And I've always kept this a secret, so I won't tell the campground. But under the Douglas fir trees, there are Oregon grape, and I'm sure your guest would be able to talk about that.
She's nodding along right now, yeah.
But this is, I've always kept it secret that there is wild ginger growing in great quantities at the bases of these trees, and I've been photographing them, studying them, and I know that various books will tell you, oh, it has no relation to ginger as such. It's completely different plant.
Okay.
It has a lemon ginger taste, and I've seen it recommended in books, and sometimes I cringe because if people were to over-harvest or not know, there are things like stinging nettle, which is wonderful in the spring and very numerous. There are many plants that I'm sure your speaker could say, but I guess my conclusion is just to remind people of the larger picture and perhaps to, learn as much as they can. I have heard over the years that in the U.S., echinacea in the wild is almost disappeared because so many people have harvested it.
Right.
And that's an extreme example.
Yeah.
But I do have, as you can tell, strong feelings about just like you
not
see
knowing.
A lot of people come from the city
Yeah.
and spend time at the park, and I would never, tell people, oh, there's wild ginger right in your, next door to
You just,
your
I think
tent.
you just have.
or
But
your-
no, I appreciate your point, Terry. That it's a really good point. It goes really back to your point about taking and establishing that relationship, not knowing perhaps the impact that you're going to have on the environment with harvesting and over harvesting. How can people be mindful about that?
Well, I think there's a protocol that has to happen. We have to recognize it's not about sustainability, it's about a regenerative protocol. And then there's permission. Who are we asking permission to go and harvest?
Yeah.
And that's why this big part for me is how do we bring this into our urban landscape? How do we recognize that brings us life? So a couple things. Thank you so much for your call, Terry, and your concern, because I also feel that very much. There's a beautiful book that was recently gifted to me for my birthday by my sister-in-law. It's called We Are the Ark by Mary Reynolds. So she's a well-known landscape architect in Ireland. So she's designing, and she realized one day, as she's watching these creatures go across her backyard, as they're mowing down and plowing and taking the backhoe to build a new house in the wild thicket across from her place, that there's no wild spaces. So she's talking about 50% wild spaces. So for me, Terry, I feel that as someone of mixed ancestry, let's start with our own ancestral foods that have come here. So that's a good place to start. And then let's put back our native plants. So that wild ginger, we're going to find it here in the urban setting, or in your garden or in your neighbor's garden, right? So we can expand this.
Yeah.
And so therefore we're back in the relationship There's such joy to see a child be able to know they can pick that berry.
Oh, it is wonderful, isn't it? Terry, important point. Thank you very much for that. Mike is up next now in Port Hardy. What do you want to say about foraging, Mike?
Hi, Mike. Hi. I'd like to, first of all, thank you for taking my call. I do a lot of wild food harvest, wild berries, plants, and medicinal plants. And the number one threat to wild harvest and wild foraging is the fact that logging companies are allowed to aerial spray glyphosate herbicide over much of these lands. I know that there's an application for the logging companies to spray over 500 cut blocks on the North Island. And this kills absolutely every leaf-bearing plant, berries, fruits, medicinal plants, and leaves only the conifers. Okay. And I think we need to put a stop to spraying poisons on the lands if we want to be able to do wild harvest.
Mike, thank you very much for the call. I'll ask you about that and safety, in fact, in a moment. But let's just get Reg in from the Peace Country, because you actually live on a northern lakeside property and forage there, Reg?
That's right. Yeah, it's a beautiful lakeside property, about 5 acres. I practice permaculture. Very much appreciate the words of your guest on the whole relationship part of it. It's not just a utilitarian thing. It feeds your spirit. You know, it helps to educate. I've been involved with projects with a nonprofit group for a long time called the Boreal Center for Sustainability. We published a book called Boreal Forest Bounty that just identifies some of the more dominant species that people can pick safely and carefully. But it's the areas used. I encourage continued access by my friends here at Soto First Nations, West Moberly. You know, the harvest for the berries every year once the bears are done with them. But it's a lot to really build that relationship and to just feel it. And sometimes you don't pick. But,
you know what? That's a really good point as well. Boreal Forest Bounty was your book.
And the other one is Boreal Herbal by Beth Gray. Your friend will know that one.
Wonderful. Reg, always good to hear from you from the Peace. Thanks so much for the call.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
I have just about 30 seconds left here, but let me just ask you, safety, I think, came up there. So perhaps you can just give a little bit of advice on being safe.
Well, absolutely. Get a good foraging book, identification book, I should say. Go out with somebody who knows their plants. Start with one. I just want to add that stinging nettle, by the way, we need to have that growing here in our city. There are 5 species of butterflies that lay their eggs. So we can see when we take out our native plants in our environment, we are losing life. And I think this has been a great discussion. Thank you so much, Michelle.
Been a wonderful discussion. Thank you for your time. Laurie Snyder, a Métis educator and herbalist. This is BC Today. Thank you so much for listening and watching to the program. I'm Michelle Eliot. Have a great afternoon.